The Heinkel He-111's origins trace back to the early 1930s, during a period when Germany was beginning to rearm in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Officially, Germany was restricted from developing military aircraft, so the He-111 was initially presented as a fast civilian airliner and transport to mask its intended purpose as a medium bomber. Designed by Siegfried and Walter Günther of Heinkel Flugzeugwerke, the aircraft was conceived to meet the clandestine needs of the rapidly expanding Luftwaffe, which required a modern twin-engine bomber capable of both strategic and tactical roles. The design aimed to combine speed comparable to contemporary fighters with a substantial bomb load and range, creating a platform that could evade interception through speed and altitude rather than heavy defensive armament. The Günther brothers incorporated several aerodynamic innovations into the He-111's design. The aircraft featured an elliptical wing planform, optimized for low drag and efficient lift, echoing trends seen in contemporary high-speed aircraft. Its streamlined fuselage, initially with a conventional stepped cockpit, prioritized aerodynamic efficiency over crew visibility, while the internal bomb bay allowed the aircraft to retain a sleek profile. Power came from two Daimler-Benz or Junkers inline engines, with the exact configuration varying between prototypes and early production models, as Heinkel sought the optimal balance of power and reliability. Despite its official designation as a civilian aircraft during its development, the He-111 was built from the outset to military specifications. Structural reinforcements were included to handle the stresses of carrying bombs and defensive guns, and the fuselage was designed to allow rapid conversion from passenger service to combat roles. This dual-purpose approach gave Germany plausible deniability while laying the groundwork for a mass-produced bomber that could enter Luftwaffe service quickly once open rearmament began in 1935. The political and strategic context of the early 1930s accelerated the He-111's development. With Adolf Hitler's regime committed to reasserting German military power, the Luftwaffe required aircraft that could project force both as tactical strike platforms and as tools of intimidation. The He-111 was envisioned as a key component of Germany's strategy of Blitzkrieg, delivering concentrated bombing against enemy airfields, infrastructure, and cities in close coordination with fast-moving ground forces. Its projected speed and payload would allow it to operate without the heavy defensive armament typical of bombers of the period, reflecting a belief that speed and offensive action were the best defenses against interception. By 1935, the first prototypes were under construction, marking the beginning of a rapid testing and refinement process. Though presented at air shows and to foreign observers as a sleek airliner, the He-111's true role was an open secret, and its development signaled the Luftwaffe's transition toward a modern bomber fleet. Over the next few years, as testing advanced, the aircraft would evolve into the Luftwaffe's most numerous and versatile medium bomber, forming the core of Germany's aerial campaigns across Europe. Its early trials would determine whether Heinkel's blend of aerodynamic innovation and pragmatic engineering could deliver a bomber capable of meeting the ambitious demands of Germany's emerging air strategy. The first Heinkel He-111 prototype, designated V1, took to the air in February 1935, powered by two BMW 6 liquid-cooled engines and configured as a 6-passenger transport to maintain its civilian guise. Test flights quickly confirmed the aircraft's aerodynamic promise, with its elliptical wings providing excellent lift and relatively low drag, but the BMW engines failed to deliver the desired speed and climb performance for military use. Subsequent prototypes, including the V2 and V3, experimented with alternative power plants, notably Daimler-Benz DB600 and Junkers Jumo 210 engines, both of which significantly improved overall performance and laid the foundation for the aircraft's military adaptations. Flight trials revealed both strengths and shortcomings. The He-111 demonstrated impressive speed for a twin-engine aircraft of its size, capable of exceeding 200 miles per hour at altitude, which made it faster than many contemporary fighters in 1935-36. Its streamlined fuselage and internal bomb bay allowed for a sleek profile, minimizing drag compared to external load bombers. However, stability issues at high speeds and during steep turns prompted refinements to the tailplane and control surfaces, while early landing gear proved vulnerable to hard landings, requiring structural reinforcement. To accelerate development, Heinkel produced two parallel prototypes, one focused on the civilian airliner configuration, the other explicitly tailored for bombing. The He-111A, a militarized version, featured bomb racks and defensive machine gun positions, though its limited engine power and restricted payload capacity led the Luftwaffe to reject it for mass production. These trials underscored the need for more powerful engines and a sturdier airframe to fulfill operational requirements. The subsequent He-111B addressed these concerns by adopting the Daimler-Benz DB600 engines, boosting speed to over 270 miles per hour, and enabling a bomb load of up to 1,500 kilograms, making it one of the fastest and most capable bombers of its generation. The shift from prototype to production was expedited by Germany's accelerating rearmament. Even as testing continued, the Luftwaffe ordered pre-production aircraft to equip its first bomber units, recognizing that the He-111 could fulfill immediate needs for a fast, medium-range bomber despite ongoing refinements. Production aircraft incorporated design changes derived from testing, including strengthened landing gear, improved cockpit visibility, and enhanced defensive armament with nose, dorsal, and ventral gun positions. By 1937, the He-111 had transitioned fully into production, with the B-series entering frontline service while newer variants were already under development. These models featured increased fuel capacity, refined aerodynamics, and expanded payload options, making the aircraft suitable not only for tactical bombing, but also for longer-range strategic missions. Early operational evaluations in Spain with the Condor Legion would soon provide the He-111 with its first combat test, where its speed and payload capacity would earn praise even as its limited defensive firepower highlighted the need for further improvements in future models. The Heinkel He-111 entered operational service in 1936 with early B-series aircraft deployed to units of the newly formed Luftwaffe. Its first true combat testing came with the Condor Legion during the Spanish Civil War, where it was introduced alongside other modern German aircraft to support nationalist forces. In Spain, the He-111 quickly demonstrated its strengths as a fast, medium bomber. Its ability to cruise faster than most defending fighters of the time allowed it to conduct daylight raids with relatively low risk, while its internal bomb bay enabled it to deliver substantial ordnance against strategic and tactical targets. Missions included strikes on Republican infrastructure, supply lines, and urban centers, where the aircraft's speed and capacity provided a clear edge over older, slower bombers used by both sides. The Condor Legion deployment, however, also revealed the He-111's weaknesses. Its defensive armament, primarily a few manually operated 7.92mm machine guns in nose, dorsal, and ventral positions, was insufficient to provide overlapping fields of fire, leaving vulnerable angles during fighter attacks. Crews reported that while the aircraft's speed allowed it to avoid most encounters, interception by modern fighters, such as Soviet-supplied Polikarpov Ir-16s, could quickly expose these gaps. Luftwaffe planners took these lessons seriously, prompting design refinements to expand gun coverage and upgrade power plants for greater speed, helping the bomber maintain its edge as air combat technology advanced. As the Luftwaffe expanded in the late 1930s, the He-111 became its primary medium bomber, forming the backbone of Kampfgeschwader, bomber wings, alongside the Dornier Do 17. By the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939, the aircraft had matured into the P-series, featuring more powerful Daimler-Benz DB601 engines, increased bomb loads of up to 2,000 kilograms, and improved fuel capacity for extended missions. Luftwaffe commanders valued the He-111 for its versatility, using it for level bombing, maritime patrol, and even occasional transport roles, though its primary function remained the delivery of concentrated bombing against enemy targets. In its early wartime operations during the invasions of Poland and Norway, the He-111 proved effective in blitzkrieg tactics. It supported ground forces by striking troop concentrations, bridges, and supply hubs, while also conducting raids on enemy airfields to establish German air superiority. Its speed and range enabled deep penetration missions that complemented the rapid advances of German armored and mechanized divisions. Pilots and commanders praised the bomber's reliability, range, and payload, though they continued to note its modest defensive armament as a point of vulnerability, particularly in contested airspace. By mid-1940, with the Luftwaffe preparing for the Battle of Britain, the He-111 was firmly established as the workhorse of Germany's bomber force. Its crews viewed it as a dependable, adaptable platform, while Luftwaffe leadership recognized both its value and its limitations, especially as it would soon face the challenge of extended daylight operations against a well-organized and modern fighter defense system over the United Kingdom. Its early service had solidified its central role in German air strategy, but the coming battles would test the aircraft against increasingly capable opposition and expose the limits of the design choices made during its rapid development. The Heinkel He-111 became the centerpiece of the Luftwaffe's bombing campaign during the Battle of Britain in the summer and autumn of 1940, operating alongside the Dornier Do-17 and Junkers Ju-88. Tasked with crippling British air defenses, industrial centers, and ports, the He-111 flew the majority of strategic missions, delivering payloads ranging from 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms of bombs per sortie. Its range allowed it to strike deep into British territory, targeting cities like London, Coventry, and Birmingham, as well as RAF airfields and radar installations. Operating primarily at medium altitudes in tight formations, the He-111 relied heavily on its speed and the escort of Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters, as its defensive armament alone was insufficient to counter determined attacks by RAF fighters. In these operations, the He-111's design trade-offs became more pronounced. Its relatively light defensive armament, a combination of manually operated 7.92 mm MG-15 machine guns in nose, dorsal, ventral, and beam positions, left blind spots that skilled Spitfire and Hurricane pilots exploited. While its speed had provided a measure of safety in earlier conflicts, RAF interceptors now matched or exceeded it, forcing the bombers to depend on fighter escorts and tight defensive formations. Even so, Luftwaffe losses mounted, with He-111 units suffering significant attrition during daylight raids, prompting a gradual shift toward night bombing later in the campaign. Despite these challenges, the He-111 proved resilient and adaptable. Its sturdy construction allowed many damaged aircraft to return to base, and field maintenance teams could repair structural and fabric damage quickly, ensuring high sortie rates even under heavy operational pressure. Luftwaffe commanders appreciated its ability to absorb punishment and continue flying, though they recognized the growing disparity between its capabilities and the evolving demands of contested airspace. The experience underscored the need for heavier defensive armament and improved crew protection, which would be incorporated into later variants. Following the Battle of Britain, the He-111's role shifted increasingly toward night bombing as part of the Blitz, where it faced less risk from RAF fighters and could leverage its range and payload to sustain pressure on British urban and industrial targets. Flying under the cover of darkness, He-111 crews carried out extended raids over major cities, contributing to the Luftwaffe's effort to undermine British morale and disrupt war production. These missions capitalized on the aircraft's endurance, as crews often spent 6 to 8 hours in the air, navigating by rudimentary radio beacons and visual cues in challenging conditions. Through late 1940 and into 1941, the He-111 remained central to the Luftwaffe's strategic operations despite its vulnerabilities. Its performance during these campaigns highlighted its dual identity, a bomber that, while increasingly outdated when facing modern defenses, could still fulfill its missions effectively when paired with evolving tactics. The experiences over Britain accelerated the development of upgraded variants with improved engines, armor, and weaponry, ensuring the He-111 would continue to serve as Germany's most numerous bomber in the expanding war across Europe, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. By 1941 and 1942, the Heinkel He-111 had undergone significant modifications to remain viable as the Luftwaffe's primary medium bomber amid the rapidly changing demands of the war. The P-series, which had been central to the Battle of Britain, gave way to the H-series, the most numerous and versatile line of He-111 variants. The H-3, H-5, and later H-6 models incorporated more powerful Junkers Jumo 211 engines, increasing top speeds to over 270 miles per hour, while boosting bomb load capacity to as much as 2,500 kilograms. Armor plating was added around crew positions, and fuel tanks were made partially self-sealing, addressing the survivability issues that had plagued earlier models. Defensive armament was also incrementally upgraded, with additional machine gun mounts in the waist positions and dorsal turret, though the aircraft never achieved the defensive firepower of 4-engine heavy bombers used by the Allies. These improvements allowed the He-111 to maintain operational flexibility across multiple theaters. On the Eastern Front, it became a key instrument of Germany's Blitzkrieg strategy, delivering concentrated strikes against Soviet supply hubs, rail junctions, and troop concentrations during the opening phases of Operation Barbarossa. Its range enabled it to operate from forward bases deep within occupied territory, and its ability to carry external torpedoes or mines expanded its role to include maritime strikes in the Baltic and Black Seas. However, as the Soviet Air Force recovered and introduced newer fighters like the Yak-1 and Leg-3, the He-111 increasingly relied on heavy escort cover to survive daylight missions. In the Mediterranean and North Africa, the He-111 proved equally adaptable. The H-6 variant, configured for torpedo attacks, became a central tool in disrupting Allied shipping lines to Malta and along the North African coast. Crews trained for low-level approaches against naval convoys, a hazardous but occasionally effective tactic that forced the Royal Navy to devote substantial resources to convoy defense. The bomber also served as a transport aircraft during the resupply of the Africa Corps, carrying fuel, ammunition, and even personnel across contested airspace despite Allied fighter superiority. Beyond combat, the He-111 was adapted into several specialized roles. Some aircraft were converted into glider tugs for airborne operations, including the invasions of Crete and later operations on the Eastern Front. Others were fitted with long-range fuel tanks and used as improvised transports during critical supply efforts, such as the Stalingrad airlift, where they flew perilous missions to deliver supplies to encircled German forces. Although its payload and defensive armament limited its efficiency compared to larger transports like the Junkers Ju-52, the He-111's speed and availability made it a crucial stopgap during such emergencies. By the end of 1942, despite these upgrades and adaptations, the He-111 was beginning to show its age. Allied fighters were faster, better armed, and more numerous, and newer Luftwaffe bombers like the Ju-88 were increasingly favored for demanding missions. Yet the He-111's robust airframe, extensive production base, and versatility ensured it remained the Luftwaffe's most widespread bomber, filling roles from torpedo strikes to transport and continuing to support Germany's overstretched forces across Europe, Africa, and the Eastern Front. By 1943 and 1944, the Heinkel He-111, though still the most widely used bomber in the Luftwaffe, had shifted increasingly into roles that reflected Germany's declining strategic position and the aircraft's growing obsolescence. While the H-series continued to receive incremental upgrades, including more powerful Jumo 211F and 211J engines, enhanced dorsal and waistgun mounts, and options for external bomb racks capable of carrying heavy ordnance like the 1,800 kg SC-1800 bomb, these changes could not fully offset the He-111's vulnerabilities against the rapidly advancing Allied air forces. Its maximum speed, even in improved forms, remained below that of most contemporary fighters, and despite additional defensive guns, the bomber lacked the concentrated firepower and armor of the four-engine heavy bombers it often faced. The He-111's missions reflected this reality. Increasingly, it operated at night or in secondary capacities to avoid the dense Allied fighter coverage dominating European skies by 1943. In strategic roles, it was used for nighttime raids against British cities during the latter stages of the Blitz, and in sporadic attacks on Soviet urban and industrial centers. However, its most prominent late-war duties came in tactical and logistical roles. The aircraft was heavily employed as a transport during critical operations, such as supplying German forces during the Demyansk pocket, and later in the disastrous Stalingrad airlift, where He-111s carried fuel, ammunition, and rations under constant threat from Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Losses in these missions were severe, but the bomber's availability and cargo capacity ensured it remained a key component of the Luftwaffe's emergency logistics. The He-111 also became a launch platform for innovative, though often desperate, weapon systems. Modified H-6 and H-16 variants were used to deploy V-1 flying bombs and, later, experimental guided munitions such as the Fritz X and Heinkel HS-293. These missions, while technically significant, were few in number and did little to alter the course of the war. In the Mediterranean, the aircraft continued its torpedo bombing duties against Allied shipping, but as naval air defenses and Allied carrier-based aircraft grew stronger, these operations became increasingly costly and less effective. As the Luftwaffe's fuel shortages worsened, and Allied bombing devastated Germany's aircraft production, the He-111 was pressed into service wherever possible, even as a glider tug for transporting troops and supplies, or as a stopgap night bomber in support of retreating German armies on the Eastern Front. Crews relied heavily on terrain masking, weather, and darkness to survive missions as daytime sorties became increasingly suicidal. By late 1944, the He-111, though still present in significant numbers, was largely relegated to support functions, unable to perform as a frontline bomber in the face of Allied air superiority. Its continued use was a testament to the Luftwaffe's reliance on a proven, mass-produced airframe, even as the strategic and technological landscape rendered it outdated. Despite these limitations, the He-111 remained operational until the final months of the war, flying evacuation, resupply, and occasional bombing missions as the Luftwaffe struggled to maintain any semblance of striking power amid Germany's collapsing war effort. After the collapse of the Third Reich in 1945, the Heinkel He-111's operational career did not end immediately, though its role shifted dramatically as surviving airframes were either scrapped, repurposed, or absorbed by other nations. In Germany, most remaining aircraft were seized and dismantled by the Allies as part of post-war disarmament, but a number of He-111s were captured intact for evaluation. The United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union tested several examples to study their aerodynamics, structural durability, and handling characteristics, gathering data that informed post-war bomber and transport development. These evaluations confirm both the aircraft's strengths, a rugged airframe and efficient range for its class, and its limitations, particularly its inadequate defensive protection compared to late war standards. The He-111's most notable post-war service came not in Germany but in Spain. During the late 1940s, Spain, which had received He-111 H-16s and H-23s during and after the Second World War, continued to operate the aircraft under the designation CASA 2.111. Produced under license by Construcciones Aeronáuticas S.A., CASA, these Spanish-built versions used remaining German airframes and later, due to a lack of Daimler-Benz engines, were fitted with Rolls-Royce Merlin power plants. These modified aircraft served as bombers, transports, and trainers within the Spanish Air Force well into the 1960s, with some continuing as transport or utility aircraft even longer. Their extended use made Spain the last nation to operate the He-111 in military service. Outside Spain, a handful of He-111s saw limited service in smaller air forces, often as transports or training aircraft, though most were quickly retired as jet aircraft became dominant. Many surviving German-built He-111s were scrapped during the late 1940s due to a shortage of spare parts and the Allied destruction of production facilities, while others were abandoned on airfields across Europe, scavenged for usable components before being scrapped. The He-111's post-war legacy extended into popular culture and historical preservation. Spanish-built CASA 2.111s, visually nearly identical to wartime He-111s, became stand-ins for German bombers in numerous films, including notable war movies such as The Battle of Britain, 1969. These appearances kept the aircraft's silhouette familiar to post-war audiences even as authentic wartime examples dwindled. Today, only a small number of original and Spanish-built He-111s survive, preserved in museums or private collections. A few CASA 2.111s were restored to airworthy condition in the late 20th century, occasionally flying at air shows before being retired due to maintenance costs and safety concerns. These remaining aircraft stand as rare artifacts of the Luftwaffe's primary workhorse, representing both its central role in Germany's wartime strategy and its unusual post-war afterlife in the service of nations far removed from its origins. The He-111's continued visibility in museums and films underscores its dual identity as a technological milestone of early war aviation and as a symbol of how a once advanced design, through adaptation and necessity, could linger long after its prime. Its survival in any form highlights its significance as one of the most recognizable bombers of the Second World War, a machine that, while increasingly outdated by the war's end, left a lasting imprint on aviation history. The Heinkel He-111's legacy rests on its position as the Luftwaffe's most prolific and recognizable medium bomber, a symbol of Germany's early war dominance and the rapid pace of aviation development during the Second World War. More than 6,000 were built in a variety of configurations, serving as the backbone of German bombing operations from the invasion of Poland in 1939 through to the final months of the war in 1945. Its sleek profile, elliptical wings, and distinctive glazed nose became synonymous with the Blitz and the Luftwaffe's aerial campaigns across Europe, while its adaptability allowed it to fill roles far beyond its original design. From torpedo bomber and glider tug to transport, trainer, and even launch platform for experimental weapons like the V-1 flying bomb, the aircraft's impact extended beyond its direct combat role. Its service in nearly every major theater, from the frigid Arctic to the deserts of North Africa and the vast expanses of the Soviet Union, demonstrated the importance of versatility in military aviation. While never as fast or heavily armed as later bombers, the He-111's ability to remain operational through incremental upgrades allowed it to support Germany's war effort long after newer designs had surpassed it. This longevity underscored both the limitations of Germany's wartime production, which struggled to replace aging designs quickly, and the aircraft's inherent utility as a reliable, if increasingly vulnerable, workhorse. In historical perspective, the He-111 exemplifies the transitional nature of early war bomber design. Conceived when speed was considered a bomber's primary defense, it thrived in the late 1930s and early 1940s when few fighters could match its performance. Yet by the middle of the war, advances in fighter technology, radar, and air defense systems rendered such aircraft increasingly obsolete, forcing them into night bombing and support roles. This arc of early dominance, gradual adaptation, and eventual obsolescence reflects the broader technological trajectory of the conflict, where rapid innovation continually reshaped the air war. Culturally, the He-111 remains one of the most recognizable aircraft of the war, its silhouette immortalized in wartime footage, photographs, and post-war cinema. Spanish-built Casa 2.1 lens ensured that the type continued to appear on screen and at air shows well into the late 20th century, preserving its image even as authentic wartime examples became rare. Today, surviving He-111s and their Spanish derivatives are displayed in museums across Europe and North America, where they stand as tangible reminders of the Luftwaffe's aerial campaigns and the pivotal role medium bombers played in Germany's military strategy. The He-111's enduring presence in historical exhibitions and media reflects both its operational significance and its broader symbolic value. It is remembered not as the most advanced or powerful bomber of the war, but as the aircraft that carried the bulk of the Luftwaffe's bombing burden, a design that, through sheer numbers and adaptability, became the Luftwaffe's quintessential workhorse over Europe. Its story illustrates how a single aircraft conceived under the guise of civilian development could rise to prominence, adapt under pressure, and ultimately become a lasting icon of the air war it once dominated. After the war, the Heinkel, He-111's place in aviation history, became defined as much by its afterlife as by its wartime service. Most surviving Luftwaffe aircraft were destroyed or scrapped by the Allies in the late 1940s, but the design lived on through Spanish-built Casa 2.111s, which ensured that the silhouette of Germany's most prolific bomber remained visible for decades. Produced under license by Construcciones Aeronáuticas S.A., these aircraft initially incorporated leftover German-built fuselages and parts before transitioning to locally manufactured components, and eventually British Rolls-Royce Merlin engines due to the unavailability of Daimler-Benz power plants. Serving the Spanish Air Force as bombers, transports, and trainers, the Casa 2.111s remained operational into the 1960s and early 1970s, long after the original Heinkels had vanished from military inventories. These Spanish-built variants became the primary means by which the He-111 survived in public memory. Many were repurposed for cinematic productions, most notably in films such as The Battle of Britain, 1969, where their visual similarity to wartime He-111s made them natural stand-ins for Germany's bombers. This cinematic exposure, combined with their long post-war service, cemented the aircraft's iconic profile for generations who had not witnessed its operational heyday. Preservation efforts, aided by the availability of Casa airframes, allowed a small number of He-111 derivatives to be restored for display and, in some cases, flight. Museums across Europe and North America now exhibit surviving examples, including both wartime Heinkels and Spanish-built aircraft, often restored to represent Luftwaffe colors and configurations. These preserved planes serve not only as artifacts of Germany's air war, but also as case studies in the adaptation and endurance of aircraft designs beyond their intended operational lifespan. The He-111's legacy also extends into the study of aerial warfare and aircraft design. Its long career, spanning its early use as a fast, lightly defended bomber to its later service as a transport, night raider, and weapons platform, illustrates the evolution of bomber doctrine during the Second World War. Military historians and engineers examine its progression to understand how aircraft conceived in the mid-1930s adapted, through successive upgrades, to remain relevant in a rapidly advancing technological environment. By the late 20th century, the He-111 had transitioned fully into a historical and cultural symbol, its active service a distant memory, but its presence preserved through surviving airframes, films, and historical scholarship. The aircraft's continued recognition highlights its dual significance. As the core medium bomber of the Luftwaffe during its years of expansion and conquest, and as a reminder of how pragmatic design and sheer production numbers can sustain an aircraft far beyond the point where it might otherwise have been retired. Its post-war visibility ensured that, unlike many of its contemporaries, the He-111 would remain embedded in the collective memory of aviation history. The Heinkel He-111's legacy endures as the embodiment of the Luftwaffe's medium bomber force, a machine that reflected both the ambitions and limitations of Germany's aerial strategy during the Second World War. Originally conceived under the guise of a civilian airliner to circumvent international restrictions, it evolved into a fast, sleek bomber that dominated early campaigns from Poland and France to the Blitz over Britain. Its speed, range, and payload capacity made it a cornerstone of the Luftwaffe's offensive operations, while its adaptability allowed it to transition into diverse roles as the war's demands shifted, from torpedo bomber and glider tug to transport, night raider, and even a launch platform for experimental weapons. Yet the He-111 also illustrates the rapid pace of wartime aviation development and the challenges faced by Germany's aircraft industry. What had been a cutting-edge bomber in 1939 became increasingly vulnerable by 1942 as Allied fighters, radar, and air defense networks outpaced its incremental upgrades. Despite efforts to bolster its armament, armor, and engine power, the aircraft could not match the survivability and striking power of four-engine Allied bombers, nor could it escape its reliance on tactics that avoided rather than withstood interception. Its prolonged service was as much a reflection of production realities and the lack of viable replacements as it was of its inherent versatility. Culturally and historically, the He-111 remains one of the most recognizable aircraft of the war. Its distinctive silhouette, immortalized in photographs, newsreels, and later in films through Spanish-built Casa 2.1LMs, ensured its continued visibility long after its operational career ended. Today, preserved examples and their derivatives displayed in museums and occasionally in flight offer tangible links to the air campaigns that defined much of the European conflict. The aircraft's story underscores broader truths about the Second World War. That technological innovation, while critical, often intersected with pragmatism, production capacity, and the necessity of adaptation. The He-111 was neither the most advanced nor the most formidable bomber of its time, but its sheer numbers, operational flexibility, and persistence ensured it remained central to the Luftwaffe's efforts until Germany's final defeat. Its history serves as a case study in how a design born from subterfuge and compromise could nonetheless become the backbone of a major air force's strategy, and how such aircraft, even as they fade from combat relevance, can endure as enduring symbols of an era defined by rapid technological and strategic transformation.